The US is responsible for 5% of the world's population, but we account for more than 25% of its prisoners. Why is that? Are Americans more inherently violent, or are the systems that govern American more violent?
1,000,000%. And there I go with my percentages. But no, I think also on that point is that so many other jail and prison systems around the world are not for-profit systems. And so not only are they not incarcerating as many people, but the goal is actually rehabilitation, not making money for shareholders, not recidivism because that keeps beds full and that's good for, again, shareholders, but actually making sure that when people are getting out, they are able to return to society. And that's just clearly not a priority for this country. I mean, so many people are languishing and dying behind their cells, and that serves shareholder desires. So it's really this vicious cycle that only benefits that 1% and those invested in those industries.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing that many people do not know is that many of these for-profit entities, whether it be detention centers or official prisons and jails, have contracts with local governments that basically says that they need to fill the city, the state needs to fill a certain amount of beds. Otherwise, they renege on their contract. You know how dangerous that is? That now incentivizes police, cities, and states to fill beds versus actually to solve crime.
Oh, yeah. And that we see that playing out in things like stop and frisk and similar policies where there are now quotas around, even if there is not crime, you have to hit a certain amount of numbers by the end of your shift for it to be considered success. And for me, it's like, well, isn't the goal for police to get to a place where they do not have to arrest so much because we are preventing the harm to happen? But no matter whether the crime rates are down, the quotas remain the same. They actually are going up with time. And so that's when you have moments where, okay, typical incarceration is not sexy, but immigration detention is. To bring up a pop culture example, Orange is the New Black. I mean, the show has been out for forever. So if this is a spoiler for you, that you took too long to watch it. But they kind of showed this in the last season where, the movement against mass incarceration and the Black Lives Matter movement is really pushing the closure of jails and prisons. And so you have these nonviolent offenders and women who have served the majority of their sentences who are being released from the prisons and rearrested in the parking lots. And this is really something that happens by ICE. And sent to immigration detention centers because that is the new area without oversight, the new area that you can do things on. So I'm just really glad that we're digging into this even before we bring on our guests.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the system targets those who are the most vulnerable within our societies, oftentimes who lack the least amount of agency. And I'll be very transparent. I come from a family where I have multiple family members who have been incarcerated, and none of those incarcerations of my family members or those within my community made my community more safe, because the idea that arresting people, taking them off the street automatically creates safer environments, it's actually false. The presence of police oftentimes make our communities more dangerous. And so I think we as a community, in a collaboration with our elected officials, need to have a much larger conversation of how we define public safety and making sure that, arresting people on suspicion of violence isn't the same thing as creating a just and safe environment for everyone to be able to live and thrive, especially with these now ICE raids that can go into churches and schools and grocery stores and people's homes. That doesn't make us feel safe. If anything, it creates an increased level of tension that all of our communities now have to navigate.
Yeah. And it goes back to profit. It's all about, the expenditures are really investments for them, right? So the U.S. spends $182 billion a year on incarceration. That's an investment by the United States. And they know that they're going to get a return on that investment. That investment goes into prison guards and barbed wire. It also goes into surveillance tech. Anywhere you go, there's a camera watching you, e-monitoring, cash bail, phone call fees, commissary markups, medical care that actually doesn't care and is ineffective, contracts that profit off of suffering. That's the reality of where where we're at. And so people are putting their money into these systems knowing that it's big business. It's big business in this country.
Absolutely. People used to think we were joking when we said it's $1 billion industry. And I used to work for Amnesty International leading its mass incarceration work. And one of the things that I find very fascinating, which is why I think building the coalition around mass incarceration reform in the United States is so hard, is that in the 1950s, in the 1940s, and the 1930s, America used to build things. Fun fact, we actually used to build things, right? Before the during the Industrial Revolution, before the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we used to build things. And so a lot of small towns around the country used to be absorbed by these big factories that provided jobs for the local community. Guess what those factories have now been replaced with? Prisons. It's hard to go into those communities and say, we need to reform mass incarceration. We need to, stop the violence, provide justice, and reform mass incarceration in this country. Yeah. But these folks, this is the only jobs that they have for 50, 60, 70 miles in their hometown. And that is, I think, goes to show you just how deliberate and the intentionality is to stop a lot of the reform that is necessary. And you have like progressive mayors, quote unquote, progressive mayors across the country who are building these cop cities. It's like, at the very least, are you going to believe the data that arrest more police does not make our community safe? And it's becoming extremely frustrating. And I think it goes to show the rest of the world that America is not as free and just as it claims to be. Like that wool is now being pulled off the rest of the world's eyes.
Yeah, 1 million. Oh, I love that you got into that. So real, so real. And also, I think the emphasis too, because there's a Nelson Mandela quote of like, you can tell a country's values, I'm paraphrasing, you can tell a country's values by how it treats its children and its most vulnerable, including prison populations. And in America, those are one and the same. Young people are such a large part of this prison industrial complex as well. To bring up, like our past work, we are both on the boards of the Gathering for Justice, an organization founded by Harry Belafonte around juvenile justice and ending child incarceration. He was inspired to start this organization in 2005 when a 5-year-old Black girl named Jaisha Scott was arrested, handcuffed in her classroom for throwing a tantrum. What are we talking about? And so you have this civil rights icon, this movie star, this musical legend who is watching a young Black girl being arrested in her classroom and who is saying, what did the civil rights movement accomplish if this is what's happening to our young people? And so that is what scholars are calling the youth control complex, this web of system that criminalizes Black and brown youth from school to the streets. There's an incredible book called Push Out that talks about this. Which specifically happens to young Black kids who are told you're being too loud in class. That's disorderly conduct. You can be arrested. You defend yourself at school and get into a fight. That's now an assault charge. And so kids are not being treated as kids. The school to prison pipeline has really become this cradle to prison pipeline. And so from birth, young Black children, young brown children are being criminalized and shuffled through these detention centers and primed for their real role, which is to be adults in the system, which is, again, an investment. You invest in it when they're young, and now you know that you have a future prison population the moment they hit the age of being seen as adults.
Oh, the adultification of Black and brown kids are staggering. Like Tamir Rice, right? Like a little boy with a toy gun in a playground being shot within seconds of police arriving on the scene, believing that he was a grown man and he had a real gun. It just goes to show you the lack of training our police officers have,
how they're being trained. Yeah.
The fact that they don't care, right? They don't care because they know that they can cause harm to Black and brown communities, and there's going to be little to no accountability, or the city's going to write a check with our tax dollars to the victims. I also think what was really important about your statement, is this idea that we have instructed entire ecosystems, right, that filters children up to the school to prison pipeline or school to deportation. And a lot of it is based on if you've ever gone into an inner city school. If you've ever gone into an inner city school, and I've been to inner city schools, we've been to inner city schools. If you go to an inner city school and then go to a prison in the United States, they are vastly similar. Bars on the wall, metal detectors at the door, telling students they need to walk in one file line, not talk until spoken to. This is the culture of how we're training and teaching kids to go into a prison. And I know it's going into prisons and it's not into the workforce because no workforce look like that, right? No workplace looks like the way our schools are designed. And there's a really great meme that like shows the parallels between everything from the cafeteria to the classroom to the hallways, the metal detectors, how eerily similar they are to our incarcerated systems in this country. And I just want to tell y'all, it's devastating to think about raising children, raising a family in a way which will criminalize them from the moment that they breathe, actually before they breathe their first breath in this.
Yeah, because I have a little Black son, a beautiful 1-year-old baby boy, and thinking that there's someone looking at his beautiful face and smile and planning on conditioning him in those ways is really terrifying, because it is conditioning. It's making people comfortable with the surveillance, with the control, with having so little autonomy over your life, so that when you are further entrenched into these systems, it just feels natural and not abnormal. And like you said, you just described the schools that I went to growing up, especially around a holiday. Like I remember talking to my wife about the fact that around Halloween, we couldn't bring book bags to school because it would make the lines at the metal detectors longer. And then at the last weeks of school, they had to be clear book bags if you did bring a bag. Like all of these moments are to say, because when you go and visit someone in jail or prison, they'll tell you what colors you can and can't wear, how low your neckline can or cannot be, what you can or cannot bring in with you. And so it's all control, and the control is tied to the profit, because then when they control what you can bring in, then you have to use their privatized systems. You have to use their telecom giants. You have to use their food vendors. You have to get the clothing that comes from the specific companies that make prison clothing. And so it's why they say the system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it was built to be. The conditioning leads to dependency on the same corporations and companies that fit into the guidelines that work within the system of surveillance and control. And then you don't even think about the fact that, oh, wait, basically you're telling me I have to spend my money with these spaces to have any sort of freedom or connection to my people on the inside, or if you are on the inside, to my people on the outside.
Yeah. And I can tell you there's nothing normal about holding people in bondage. We all know, if you ever read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, we know that slavery didn't end, it transformed to mass incarceration. And we're going to dive more into that with our guest, Bianca, when we come back. But just to remind you, you're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
We are back on the other side of change, only on the Black Star Network. We are joined today by someone whose work has fundamentally changed how we understand incarceration, and I know it will change how you think about this as well. Bianca Tylik is the founder of Worth Rises and the author of the newly released book, The Prison Industry. It shines a light on the billions made off the backs of incarcerated people. We are so grateful to have her. Bianca, welcome to the other side of change.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you both, Tamira and Bree.
No,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah, we were just talking before we brought you on how timely this book is. And I think as folks are every few years we talk about mass incarceration and little chips away at progress seems to happen, but largely the system doesn't change. Can you tell us, because your book, really breaks down the industry behind incarceration and how it has been, really the encyclopedia talking about corporate greed. Can you walk us through how deep and wide this greed really is and how it infiltrates many of the communities we all live and work in?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the prison industry is an $80 billion industry, which is a lot of what people really don't understand. People think about the prison industry and they think private prisons, right? And obviously they are very, very a big part of sort of mainstream media right now because of everything that's going on within the federal government. But private prisons are really just like the tip of the iceberg. They're only about 5 billion of that 80 billion. So the $80 billion industry is more about sort of the outsourcing and money that is funneled through incarcerated bodies and incarceration system and detention as well. And so it's everything from healthcare to food and commissary to telecom, and there's a chapter about every single one of these sort of mini sectors within the industry in the book. And then importantly, with each of these, it really does, we delve into the history of how we got to the privatization of these sectors, but also the harms that they're causing to communities. And so as you said, it's like what is happening to communities because of these particular sectors, the privatization and the corporate greed, and at times government greed that's being sort of levied, is families and people who are incarcerated are truly suffering. Everything from the cost of a simple phone call that leads 1 in 3 families with an incarcerated loved one into debt, to companies that deny people basic and preventative and necessary at times healthcare, to sort of pad their bottom lines by cutting costs and then use bankruptcy courts to wipe their slate clean and do it all over again. You have food companies that really are serving people absolutely grotesque food, and oftentimes pop culture likes to say, well, food in prison is bad notoriously, and that's funny. It's not funny, because more than people who are incarcerated get food illness more than 6 times more than people on the outside, and that has long-term health consequences.
Wow.
Not to mention that they're being fed, rodent feces and body parts and things of that sort. So it's a vast industry that is like deeply impacting people in their health and their emotional state and their financial state and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Dang. Oh my gosh. I didn't, I think these are the things that are so important to outline, because as you said, they have become almost like pop culture phenomenons. There are jokes that are made about prison food, about not dropping the soap, about all of these sorts of conditions, and we normalize them, but it's real trauma and it has real impacts on people who we want to come back out of society and be able to participate and be citizens again after being treated like worse than the thing at the bottom of the shoe. I want to get into, though, what you said at the top, which is that this is an $80 billion industry and the private prisons are only $5 billion of that. Who is profiting and getting rich off of this? Because it seems obvious that the system is invisible and mysterious by design. There's like this, it's like the Wiz where, it's like the wizard is behind the curtain. And so it's unclear who exactly benefits from the food being so bad, who benefits from the conditions being so deplorable, who gets that $80 billion.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think that the opaqueness of our prison industry is critical to its operation, and it's intentional for the way in which it moves. You have to sort of remember that a common citizen, whether you're a taxpayer, even though you're a taxpayer paying for the system, you can't just walk into a prison. right? Journalists can't just walk into prisons. In many states, not even elected officials can walk into a prison. And so these places are wildly opaque, incredibly, like there is just a lack of oversight of any type. And anytime you have sort of financial interests moving into a space like that, where it is just really not seen to the public and cannot be, there's no transparency, there's no checks and balances, you should expect abuse to happen. And that's particularly true when we villainize people the way that we do who are incarcerated and their families, right? So who is it who's profiting off these systems? It is a huge matrix. There are over 4,000 corporations that are engaged in the prison industry. And in those corporations, you have everything from major publicly traded conglomerates like 3M that supply raw materials for prison labor, to mom and pop shops, to local sort of car dealerships. Like, you sort of name it, there's a vast network of these corporate interests. And then they're also like hand in hand with the government. Take telecom again. You have an industry that is $1.5 billion on its own. 90% of that is actually owned by 3 companies, all of which are owned by private equity firms. One of the largest in that field, Platinum Equity, is owned by the owner of the Detroit Pistons. So this starts to like feed into our sort of social fabric, our cultural institutions, our sports, all of that, and shape how we, view what the narratives are that are told about people who are incarcerated because of those who are in power, who are making money off of it. And so it's like, it's vast in that way. But I also have to mention that it is also, sort of a huge part of that $80 billion are the corrections officers and staff that are within those prisons and jails, right? And this has to do with people being shipped from, in many cases, urban cities for jobs in rural America where prisons were built throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And now we are in a situation where even when we see the actual prison population drop and maybe a prison is under threat of close, you have those officers fighting, right, to keep those prisons open. And there's something really, really perverse about saying that we need to put people in cages in order for other people to have jobs. Like, that is not how our economy should be built.
I'm so happy you made it. So we talked about that before in the beginning at the top of the show, and this idea that many of the factories in rural communities were replaced with private prisons or even just state and city run prisons. And to your point, on a larger scale, when we think about like who is benefiting, we, the public, is benefiting. The U.S. labor prison produced an estimated $2 billion in industry output last year. That's fast food restaurants. That's the signs that you need for your cars. Like, there are so many industries that benefit off.
Actually, more than that.
So exactly, right.
$7 billion. $2 billion is just services. $9 billion is like actual products that are made in prisons and jails. And even that is a wild underestimate of what comes out.
No, but so to that point, we are almost participating in the very systems that we know are demonizing our community. So how do we, the public, become more conscious of the things that we buy and participate in, knowing where they come from, but also being okay with recognizing, should we be successful in eliminating private prisons and reducing mass incarceration, that it will hurt our pockets in a way that we have to be okay with if it means creating a more just society?
Yeah, I think that there's actually a number of different interests there. I think that we're actually being short-sighted. Mm-hmm. The version that we're told now, right, and that we know, which is, yes, we are benefiting in all these different ways. And I want to be clear, it's often not us benefiting, but sometimes the corporations, governments in different places, and yes, then the taxpayers sort of down the line. But there are also, we did actually a cost-benefit analysis of ending slavery in prisons. Mm-hmm. It's 2025. We did a cost benefit analysis on ending slavery. I just want to note that. But we did, nevertheless, working with, sort of very high profile, high level, like economists. And what we found was that actually ending slavery would put $18 billion minimum back into our economy on an annual basis. And so as much as we are getting a lot out of the institution of slavery and incarceration, mass incarceration, we have more to gain from ending it. We just don't talk about it in that way and in the long term, because we are so short-sighted about the immediate costs that need to be then remedied. Right. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, this system is in many ways a windfall, right, for the sort of profiteers, the prison profiteers that we're talking about. But the best way for taxpayers, the everyday person, to actually save money is not through the abuse of prison labor. It is through freeing people. This system is still wildly expensive, right? Like, yes, we might get $11 billion of products and services out of prisons and jails, but we're spending $80 billion.
Yeah.
So, or more than that, right? And so at the end of the day, and mind you, that's only prisons and jails. If you add in courts and like
detention centers and halfway houses,
$180 billion. It's $185 billion that you're talking about for the entire, sort of mechanism to function. That is a huge drain on taxpayer resources. And so we can't be short-sighted in the limitations of what we get out right now, because the main people winning are not us as taxpayers. And that's beyond, that's from a financial standpoint. That's beyond the long-term impacts, economic impacts on communities, and the social impacts on the ability for different families and communities to move up the economic ladder, as well as just human decency, right? And what happens to people, as well as our safety. Our safety is not served by this system. Right. So much so that private prisons, which are in most cases the only prison-only businesses that are publicly traded, in their own annual reports that they have to file for shareholders, they actually mention a reduction in crime as a risk to their business. So if you think that this system is designed to keep you safe, you are very strongly mistaken.
That's just evil.
Yeah.
Evil.
Yeah, 1 million per. And I want to get deeper into that point of we are not being served by these industries and these corporations. And you talked about the actual just human impacts. There's so many numbers that we're throwing around that are important to understanding the business and the investments and all of that behind this. But even your point about the food illnesses and that being at a greater rate inside of these sorts of facilities. Or we were kind of leaning into earlier this idea that, when parents go into prison, the whole family suffers. Yeah. And that what are the other ways that real people and families are impacted by this privatization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these families are impacted in a number of ways, right? So people who are incarcerated are denied wages and then charged exorbitant fees and rates for often substandard sort of services and products, right? So people on average in prison are earning about 14 cents an hour. In about 7 or 8 states, people earn nothing at all on majority of jobs. And so that's important because a lot of people, when we talk about wages in prison, think, oh, well, it's the denial of wages to the person who's incarcerated, who is supposed to quote unquote pay their debt to society. I always say, who are you actually stealing wages from? Many of these people who are incarcerated were the primary breadwinners for their families before they went inside. You are stealing wages from their children for who they cannot pay child support or provide other types of family support, right, from their spouses and things of that sort. People come out of prison with tens of thousands of dollars in child support despite having worked full-time jobs. You are denying victims restitution. Imagine trying to pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in restitution on 9 cents an hour. In that case, who is the person actually paying their debt to for the harm? Is it society? Are we the ones owed, or is it the victim that's owed? In which case, why not actually give them a pathway to provide that debt or to pay that debt back to that person? Right. And then beyond that, you get not just the loss of revenue for families and victims and others, but you also get the new expense lines, right? So being in prison is not free, contrary to, again, pop culture. It's like some free ride, free healthcare, free, housing, all these things. Being in prison is incredibly expensive, especially when you have absolutely no income in many cases, or you get a check for $20 every 2 weeks. With phone calls that can, up until recently, were as much as $25 for a simple 15-minute call, thanks to some new regulations and new legislation that has come down, but can still be 10 cents, 12 cents a minute. You can still pay more per minute for phone call than you earn per hour in prison. And so where does that burden then fall? It can't be on the person who's incarcerated, because there's truly no way for them to actually pay for that. Mm-hmm. It falls on families, right? And so now families who are already disproportionately low income, have lost a income line, are having these extra costs. It's the cost of a phone call. It's the cost of visits. It's the cost of medical copays, which, big surprise to people. Yes, people in prison actually pay medical copays. It's the cost of commissary items, which I also want to say, for Black and brown people, items in commissary for hair products and skin products and things like that are actually astronomically expensive compared to those for others and those on the outside. It is tampons for women. It is all of those things, hygiene products, food. Yeah. It is an extensive array of things that families are now on the hook for.
Mm.
It's almost like a redistribution of wealth in plain sight, right? Like, you're taking money from those who are the most vulnerable in society, redistributing to institutions that are inherently set up to fail. And the idea that these systems were never designed to work in anyone's favor, but the favor of those who are investing behind the scenes in the government. And even to some extent, the government is not technically like pocketing money. They're almost wasting taxpayers' money that could be going to our schools, could be going to our neighborhoods, that would make our communities safer. Bianca, you've been in this work for a very, very long time. Very long time, right? When we first met at that secret society meeting so long ago, that fake Illuminati meeting. Oh man. You then. But you've been in this space for so long, and I am curious for you, as someone who meets with members of the community and legislators all the time, who feel like this work can feel very overwhelming. How do we start kind of taking slow bites of the elephant, that in a time in which it feels like Donald Trump is only leaning in, or the administration is only leaning into beefing up our prisons and incarceration system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really great point, Jamera, because we don't want to leave people with a hopelessness, right? I think there is a reality that this stuff can get really dark and really, awful. I mean, people are making money off the death penalty. Like, it can get really, really dark quickly. But there are opportunities, and there are things changing, and there are fights that are winning. And I think it is important to recognize that. For years, for example, in the prison telecom space, we have been levying legislation, regulation, pushing for all these things. And these things are coming to their head. They're actually winning in many, many cases. And you say take small bites of the apple. I think sometimes we can take major bites of the apple and expect to win too.
No, I said elephant. The apple is edible. The elephant is huge.
There you go. Yes. And so we passed, for example, the first piece of legislation in the country to make communication in a prisoner jail entirely free. And we're like, we don't want it cheaper. We don't want just make it free. It is 2025. I live in the city of New York, and in the city of New York, on every single New York City block, there is a kiosk where you can make a phone call anywhere in the country for free. If we can do that for the city of New York and 8 million people, we can do that in our prisons and jails. And so we started to levy that fight. And to date, we've been able to pass similar legislation in many cities and counties, states, and even the federal system, making it such that over 300,000 incarcerated people today have fully free access to phone calls. And of course, their families. We have generated over 2.5 billion additional call minutes and saved families over $500 million. And so we are making those massive strides, and the industry is upset. yet they're fighting really hard in courts and all these different things, and they haven't yet been able to score their win, so much so that one of these companies is probably weeks away from filing for bankruptcy. And so it is absolutely possible. And I think in terms of what, the average sort of person can do, there's a number of things, right? You can do everything from, if you have the time, get involved in one of your local campaigns to make communication free in prison. You can reach out to your legislator to tell them to end the exception in the 13th Amendment that still allows for slavery in our country, so long as you have been convicted of a crime. And you can do that at endtheexception.com. You can follow our work, read the book, just make sure to educate yourself and then educate others around you. You can go to data.worthrises.org, which is where we have that entire database of over 4,000 corporations that are engaged in the prison industry. And have a sort of consciousness about what businesses you engage with, whether through your day-to-day life or through your investment portfolio or through the endowment of the university that you're with, or your pension, if you're working, all of those things. So, there are many steps that I think can be taken that absolutely do make a huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
That's so good to hear you say, because I know that people, feel swamped and feel like there's so many issue areas that they care deeply about. And because these corporations feel so big, like I don't have billions of dollars to go up against them. I don't have the sort of power and influence that they have, but we do have power and influence in different ways. And it's important that we leverage it and never feel as though we are helpless in this. And we have to step up, especially for those of us who are not being swallowed by those systems, because those on the inside have even less power and influence to speak out against them. So I really appreciate that. Before we let you go, tell us what you want people to take away from the book, how people can support, where they can buy, where they might be able to find you for in-person book events, all of that.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, please buy the book. It is available in basically every online retailer, major retailer where you might buy books, as well as many local bookstores. So make sure to patronize your local bookstores. If they don't have it, feel free to ask for it. It's a great way to get it in. And then also, if you visit us at worthrises.org/the prison industry, you can find the events calendar, book talks that we're having. We just finished some in Philly, New York, and are moving to other cities around the country. And so we hope to see you at one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bianca.
Thank you.
We appreciate you deep. Thank you for doing this work, making it so easy for us to know and be informed and take action. And good luck on the book tour.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take care, y'all.
While politicians love to throw around words like climate resilience and green economy and all these other, electric cars, it's Black and brown communities that are still breathing in toxic air, that are drinking contaminated water, and that are watching their homes get wiped out by storms they didn't cause, and they don't have second homes to turn to.
Yeah, and let's not sugarcoat it. This is not an accident. Environmental racism is a deliberate outcome of decades of redlining, industrial zoning in Black neighborhoods, and policy decisions that prioritize profit over people.
Yeah, take Cancer Alley in Louisiana. I kind of mentioned this before. It's a stretch of land that is so polluted by petrochemical plants that residents are literally being poisoned, which is in essence why it's being called Cancer Alley. Young people, as young in their early 30s, late 20s, are being diagnosed with cancer because of how toxic this air is. The EPA has been promising action for years, and surprise, surprise, nothing has changed. The people living there are mostly Black and working class. This is not a coincidence. I will also add that a lot of these communities in Louisiana, they're called parishes, these like towns, were former plantations. And so the residents there are the descendants of people who enslaved on this ground. And so they were once in chains and now are being sort of strangled by the literal air that they're breathing. It brings a whole new meaning to the slogan, I can't breathe.
Oh, absolutely. And even if we look at Jackson, Mississippi, a majority Black city that went weeks without clean water, weeks without clean water in the quote unquote richest country in the world, right? The most industrialized country in the world. And when funding finally came, it went to a fraction. It was a fraction of what was actually needed to do the cleanup. That's just that's not just bad infrastructure. That is deliberate and racialized neglect.
Yes, say that, neglect. And it's the same thing that we see in places like Flint, Michigan, and Newark, New Jersey. Let's also talk about the Willow Project. Biden, when he was in office, approved a massive oil drilling plan in Alaska. After campaigning on climate justice, it of course felt like a betrayal because again, it sounds like you know all the talking points, you know all the data because you're parroting them when you're running for office, but none of that data or talking points is enough for you to actually act on. Frontline Indigenous communities have been saying loud and clear, we do not want this. It's bad for us. It's bad for you, right? Like these are communities who are activists and advocating not just for themselves, but for all of us. And unfortunately, we don't listen until it's late. They are ignored for the sake of political compromise and political expediency. And then not now, it's not going to be popular, but when is it going to be popular to decide that the planet that we live and depend on needs to be protected?
Oh, and I push back on the idea that it's not popular, right? The vast majority of Americans do want clean water. The vast majority of Americans do want access to healthy food options. They do not want to be poisoned. They don't want their children to be poisoned. And I think that we allow politicians, particularly the whole ideology of vote blue, no matter who, we talked about this a few weeks ago, shows that even when Democrats win, even when those we vote win, we are still left out of the conversation because racial justice cannot be talked about without environmental justice and vice versa. These things are equally tied together. And it doesn't serve people when we allow the narrative to say that it's not popular. It is, because people want safer environments for their families. They're oftentimes just not prioritized in a way that actually moves the money in the communities that actually need it.
Yeah, so true. And that's where intersectionality comes in. It's this power analysis that says, okay, I can be fighting around immigration justice, I can be fighting around police justice, but doing all of that on a planet that's dying, I need to also be fighting for climate justice and environmental justice. And so folks are connected to these issues. We're not just suffering, we're also organizing and fighting and resisting and sounding alarms. From Flint to Puerto Rico, communities are forming water justice coalitions, creating solar co-ops, suing the governments that failed them. It's really inspiring to see this advocacy. A lot of it is youth-led, which I love to see. Young people saying, listen, we're going to inherit this very planet that you all are destroying. And it's time that we stand up and that we fight back and that we insist on being heard.
No, absolutely. And I love the way you said Puerto Rico. Right on point. I'm sure the audience would appreciate the little accent. And no, it's a prime example that people are leading the change. The people resistance are constantly showing us that there is efforts on the ground that is happening and change is occurring. And I'm super excited that shortly we're going to be spotlighting one of our guests who is one of those people leading the change at the front lines, challenging the institutions, the individuals, and the perceived notion that change can't come and we can't protect the environment, leading with a people-centric approach and led by Black women and Black people. So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break. You are watching On the Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
We are back on the other side of change, only on the Black Star Network. This Earth Month, we are so lucky to be joined by Wawa Gatheru, founder of Black Girl Environmentalist. Wawa is a climate storyteller passionate about making the climate movement relevant and accessible to everyone, which is needed more than ever right now. Harnessing her background as a Rhodes Scholar and youth climate activist, Wawa works to bring climate justice to the mainstream. And her goal is to be an effective communicator that helps inspire a generation of quote unquote unlikely environmentalists. So we are so lucky to have you, Wawa. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yes, no, we are so excited. Okay, so let's start with this. Why is it that even as climate conversations have gone mainstream, Black and Brown communities are still being left behind? And how is your work changing that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so many different ways we can answer that. Unfortunately, like many different movements in the US, the history of the environmental movement is one that is riddled with racism. In fact, the so-called founders of the environmental movement were essentially eugenicists who crafted this language around conservation and preservation, around creating spaces out there in so-called wilderness to protect the so-called white race. And so that really is the foundation of the movement that I now call myself a part of. And so a lot of those insidious foundational aspects have still crept in. And one of the ways that we see that manifest is really this untrue notion that people of color and Black people in particular don't care about the environment, or things like climate change aren't within our purview, which actually is untrue, right? Like, we do care. And in fact, polling does show that people of color and Black and Latin people in particular actually care the most about climate change and environmental action. The issue is that the movement has not historically created a connection with us, and has had narratives that really speak to our unique lived experiences and the environmental burdens and hazards that we experience. And so there's really a narrative shift that needs to happen for the mainstream climate and environmental movement to really position itself as one that is for all of us.
No, that's so true. And I really appreciate you laying that foundation out, which is why I would love to hear you talk more about, why did you found Black Girl Environmentalist, and why specifically are you centering the voices of Black women and Black girls in that work?
Yeah, so my decision to start Black Girl Environmentalist, the seed I feel like had been planted for several years before I founded it. But honestly, I grew up in the climate movement. When I was 15 years old, I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to environmental justice. When I began to understand the scale and scope of the climate crisis, but also the ways in which it disproportionately impacts Black folks across the diaspora. And I was really frustrated that, again, this narrative around climate change was one that was so overwhelmingly focused on environments, quote unquote, out there, right? Melting ice caps, polar bears, all of which are important. But really, we're leaving out the reality that, again, we are experiencing the worst impacts of environmental injustice, of the climate crisis. We're the least represented. And I was frustrated that no one was talking about this in really meaningful ways. And so through that journey of being a young person, navigating, being the only Black girl, only Black person in my environmental classrooms, in my internships and jobs, in the organizing spaces that I was in, I just was building up all this frustration, because I knew that there was and continues to be this long legacy of Black people stewarding the earth, right? Stewarding the planet, and also specifically the role of Black women in not only the environmental movement in the US, but internationally. And so outside of my classrooms, I was doing my own research. I was learning about this history and really realizing that if I was going to stay in this movement, I needed to do what I could to create spaces for us to see each other and also to want to stay. And so I wrote an op-ed in 2020 for Vice that went really viral in the climate space, where I talked about these experiences, and I received an outpouring of responses from Black women in particular, who told me, hey, this is my story too. Like, I resonate with everything that you're talking about. And I just wish that there was a space for us to, disclose these experiences, but also opportunities for us to build power in a movement that really needs to take us and our voices and our leadership seriously. And so I started it as a digital community, as an Instagram page. Actually, we would host like these online Zoom sessions where folks would just connect. And it existed like that for 2 years while I was a grad student at Oxford, doing a dissertation that was a narrative inquiry on Black women environmentalists. So I got to interview different Black women across, the environmental sectors to better understand their journeys and to understand, the barriers that they encountered in the space, as well as how they were able to overcome. And essentially, in my conclusions page, that was the foundation of Black Girl Environmentalists. So our mission is to address the unique pathway and retention issue that exists for Black women and Black gender expansive folks in the environmental and climate sectors, because not only are we amongst the least represented in this work, but we actually have the lowest retention rate. So those of us that get movement end up leaving for a myriad of different reasons, but a lot of it is lack of community care. And so Black Girl Environmentalist is trying to really facilitate these ecosystems of care for BGEs to connect and to build power together, as well as we create our own pipelines to really create pathways for the next generation to really see themselves in this work. And we work to invest and champion these folks so that they're able to hopefully reach their full potential in the climate movement.
Ooh, I love this. You're building a pipeline. And I really love this because so many people talk about like, oh, we want you to feel seen, but being able to stay, that retention piece that you talked about is really, really important. And I think it touches on the legacy of what we're going to see now, because there's so much youth-led organizing around saving our planet and this natural environment that we depend so much on. But we also have an administration in power right now that's antithetical to all of that movement work. I think it can be very discouraging to young people, and it can lead to this sort of like brain dump and this loss of activism in this space. So what do you think of the current state of climate and environmental justice, and how we keep people in the fight, even though it is feeling very bleak right now?
Yeah, I mean, it is really bleak. Our movement ecosystem is being like many spaces around social impact are being impacted heavily right now. I am spending a lot of my time talking to other EDs who are really at the forefront of experiencing, the loss of federal funds. Climate justice and EJ, like, we honestly rely a lot on federal funds to do our work. And so what we're seeing right now is you have in the past, 3-4 years, the EPA, for example, allocating, hundreds of millions of dollars into work that is meant to uplift and support existing community solutions, as well as, create new ones, so that folks are able to have the resources necessary to build healthy ecosystems and fight back against these legacies of pollution and extraction that have really, burdened our communities, being taken away from them. Like, contracts that have been signed, countersigned, folks are not getting the money that they, were honestly legally bound to have. And so we're having to rethink a lot of things. We're having to really explore what radical collaboration looks like. We have to look at organizations scaling down, some of them actually having to close their doors, because there's huge question marks around how do we continue to do our work, even from a narrative perspective, when we have terms like environmental justice and equity being seen as, as untrue, or even climate change is not something that you can find really on the federal government's websites anymore, which is, really insane. And so to answer your question on how we can continue to this work, I mean, the work continues. It always has. Like, if we're being completely honest, environmental justice only recently has started to even get some sort of, mainstream awareness, but it's always existed, specifically in Black communities. Even before, Warren County, North Carolina in 1982, that's what the textbooks recognize as being the birth of the EJ movement. Like Black and brown people in this country have always been a part of environmental stewardship, and also have always understood that it wasn't a coincidence that toxic waste facilities and industries would place their infrastructure, again, in low-income Black communities in particular, because they understood that these communities did not have the political clout to be able to push back, as opposed to, wealthier, whiter areas. And so I think in this moment, it's really a time where folks are going to continue to do the work, but it's just going to be maybe quieter looking from folks who are not directly involved, right? The undercurrent is strong, and it's actually building and growing and becoming more resilient, but we have to get really, really creative in the ways that we tell our story, not amongst each other, but really in a way to unfortunately not get the wrong attention from the wrong actors who are, doing really crazy stuff. Like I have friends in this space that are getting, having Proud Boys come to their homes, right? So this is a landscape that we're in, but again, community care and building ecosystems of resilience is what we've always done. It's what we'll continue to do, and that's just what we're going to have to focus on right now.
No, I totally agree. And I'm happy you said that, because you're right. The work has always happened, especially happened in hostile environments. Unfortunately, we just now are dealing with folks who don't believe in science, which is really one of the most obnoxious things in the world. But you mentioned that this idea that some of the work may now get a little bit more silent and be a little bit more subtle in many ways. I want to talk about how the role of social media has played in, one, I think, opening the world up to what the climate change, and particularly understanding the intersectionality of climate change and a host of other issues, but also showing that those who are leading the fight for climate change are young women and people and young people of color. So how has social media both helped and could potentially hinder those efforts, considering that what you're saying about some of the work now becoming a little bit more subtle and focused?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling in general has been so critical in being able to, again, share the ways in which, right, like the climate crisis isn't an equal opportunity stressor, right? Like there are specific people who are experiencing this more and worse, and will continue to, because of these systems of oppression and, the colonial system and projects that, extracts from the land and from people at the same time. And even myself, like understanding that legacy, that wasn't something that I learned in school. That was something that I learned from, discovering authors, for example, like Dr. Dorceta Taylor, and then like continuing to like go on YouTube and listening to her lectures and like having my world blown up about like, oh, all these things that I thought I knew about, I didn't know anything about. And I think that social media has also aided this in highlighting, right, these like academics, scholars, community leaders, folks who have been doing this work for so long, providing them a new platform that maybe they didn't always have access to, especially as EJ has, again, existed. EJ as a praxis has existed for long before it's getting the somewhat of the recognition that it should be. But it's also, I think, in a lot of ways aided in the intellectual, exploration of the next generation of, again, having access to these terminologies and histories and legacies outside of the classroom, especially in a time where we're seeing, the education system really being hit first and worse, as a way to keep, young people from knowing the truth. And so I, even with Black Girl Environmentalists, we were able to build our community for the first 2 years solely on social media. So it has been so critical, and specifically the last 5 years has been really, really critical. And from EJ being something that I heard for the first time in my college classroom, junior year, third year, to where I went back to my undergrad, University of Connecticut, and now there are students who are trying to make, who are making individualized degrees in environmental justice. And that's because of their access to, storytellers and academics and community leaders on social media. At the same time, right now, we're seeing the ways that social media platforms are being monitored.
Yep.
And we don't even know exactly how vast this is happening and what the ramifications are. We're really in this incubation stage of in the next year, the landscape will probably look totally different. But something that I'm seeing in a lot of the conversations that I'm having, again, with funders, EDs, community members, is should we be sharing our work online? And it's tough because a lot of EJ principles really rely on participatory justice, making sure that people know what's going on, so that there can be this back and forth of relational building. But at the same time, right, in the past, sharing an impact report that goes super in depth over who you're serving, the exact ways that you're conducting your work, what your impact looks like, where you are geographically located. These are things that actually moving forward can create, again, even potentially worse outcomes and put ourselves in the crosshairs of even more vitriol. And so I don't know what it looks like even right now with our fellowship programs. Like we're questioning, should we highlight our fellows? It's something that we really love to do, to have our fellows be able to share their story on social media and be able to celebrate them in a really public way. But now we're thinking about safety. Is it safe to share our fellows and their work and the things that they're pursuing on social media? I don't know the answer to that question. I think we're going to get more information as time goes on, but it's a tough time, to be honest.
Thank you for that. So
I appreciate that transparency. No, I just appreciate that transparency. I know a lot of people are dealing with that, especially with the ways that groups like Fearless Fund have been attacked. It makes you want to draw in, but also not do so in a way that keeps you from being able to be heard and champion the things that matter. So I just appreciate you saying that. You were saying, Jameer?
No. I was just going to ask a follow-up question in regards to, where can folks learn more information about her organization, and how can folks continue the fight and or join the fight?
Yeah, I mean, hey, we're still going to be here. We're going to still do our work. The way we show up on social media might shift, but again, we're always going to be here. And what's great is, again, one of our focuses is really that retention piece and building community. And so we do have hubs across the country in tons of different cities. I'm here in Philly, so we have one in Philly. We're in DC, we're in New Orleans, we're in Chicago, we're in Houston, we're in LA, we're in New York. We're all over. You can find that list on our website or on our Instagram. www.blackgirlenvironmentalist.org, or on Instagram, just at Black Girl Environmentalist. Make sure to follow us, support our work. If you got the funds, if you got the extra change, send a little donation.
Cough it up.
Got it. But also just, bring your names into rooms. Like we're always looking for even literal space, like physical space to host different events. And if you know of any early career BGEs who want to get more involved in climate or environmental work, or already are, please direct them to us so that we can involve them in all the things that we have brewing on our side.
Love it. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you so deep, girl. Thank you for coming and speaking truth to power and letting people know where things stand. We're so grateful and excited to see what comes next in whatever iteration that looks like.